Two men were found dead on a remote hillside in Brazil. They were lying side by side, fully dressed in suits and raincoats, their hands neatly placed at their sides. There were no signs of a struggle, no external injuries, and no indication of what had killed them. But the most disturbing detail wasn't how they died, it was what they were wearing over their faces. Each man had a lead mask, hand cut from thick sheets of metal, completely covering their eyes. There was no explanation for why they had them or what purpose they served. Beside them, investigators found a small notebook. One of its pages contained a short, cryptic message. Be at the agreed place at 16:30. Take capsules after effect is felt. Protect metals. Await signal. The message raised more questions than answers. What was the agreed place? What capsules were they referring to? And what signal were they waiting for? The investigation that followed only deepened the mystery. The men were identified as Manuel Pereira da Cruz and Miguel José Viana, two radio technicians from the city of Campos dos Goitacazes. Witnesses had seen them days before their deaths, withdrawing money, buying raincoats, and heading toward Morro do Vintem Hill, where their bodies would later be found. But no one knew why they had gone there, and more importantly, no one knew what had happened to them. Forensic experts conducted autopsies, but the results were inconclusive. There was no evidence of poisoning, no signs of trauma, and no clear explanation for why they had died. The capsules they had supposedly taken were never found, and toxicology reports revealed nothing unusual. With no clear answers, theories began to emerge, each one stranger than the last. Some believed they were conducting an experimental scientific test involving radiation or electromagnetic signals. Others speculated that they were part of a spiritualist cult attempting to contact higher beings. And then there were those who believed something far more extraordinary, that the two men had been trying to communicate with extraterrestrials. Decades later, the mystery remains unsolved. Every clue leads to more confusion, and every theory, no matter how bizarre, fails to explain what truly happened. Who were these men, and what were they doing on that hill? Why did they wear lead masks, and what were they protecting themselves from? Most importantly, what happened in their final moments? This is the story of the lead masks case, one of the strangest unsolved mysteries in history. August 20th, 1966. The sun hung low over Morro do Vintem, a remote hill overlooking the city of Niterói, Brazil. The air was humid, the terrain rugged and overgrown. For a local teenager exploring the hillside that afternoon, it was supposed to be just another ordinary day. But as he made his way through the brush, something caught his eye. Two figures, motionless, lying side by side on the ground. At first he thought they were asleep, but as he stepped closer, a wave of unease settled in. Their bodies were still too still. Their clothes were immaculate. Pressed suits, formal raincoats buttoned neatly over their torsos. And then he saw it. Over their faces were two solid, handcrafted lead masks. No holes for the eyes, no straps securing them in place. Just heavy slabs of metal cut into rough ovals, covering their eyes completely. The boy froze. Something was terribly wrong. He turned and ran back toward the city, breathless, his mind racing with questions. Who were they? Why were they here? And why were they wearing those masks? By evening, local authorities had arrived at the scene. Officers made their way through the thick vegetation, their flashlights casting eerie shadows on the uneven terrain. The two bodies lay in an open clearing, untouched by scavengers, their clothes still unwrinkled as if they had carefully laid themselves down. No visible wounds, no blood, no signs of a struggle. It was as if they had simply stopped living. But the details of the scene only made things stranger. Beside the bodies, investigators found a small notebook, a folded towel, an empty water bottle, and a package containing 2 damp towels. There were no personal belongings, no wallets, no identification, nothing that would immediately reveal who these men were or why they had come to this place. And then there was the note. Handwritten in Portuguese, it read, "Be at the agreed. Place at 16:30. Take capsules after effect is felt. Protect metals, await signal." It was short, precise, and utterly cryptic. What capsules, what metals, and what signal were they waiting for? Detectives examined the bodies for clues. They checked for signs of external injuries, puncture wounds, or any evidence of poisoning. But nothing seemed out of place. The men looked peaceful, as if they had simply laid down and drifted into death. Empty. With no clear answers at the scene, authorities transported the bodies to the local morgue for examination. The victims were soon identified as Manuel Pereira de Cruz and Miguel José Viana, 2 electronic technicians from the town of Campos dos Goitacazes, nearly 200 miles away. The autopsy, however, only deepened the mystery. There were no signs of trauma, no gunshot wounds, no stab marks, no bruising, nothing that pointed to a violent death. Their organs appeared normal, and there was no conclusive evidence of poisoning. Strangely, while police suspected that the men had ingested the mysterious capsules mentioned in the note, no pill fragments were found in their stomachs. Whatever they had taken, if they had taken anything at all, had left no trace. Forensic experts tested for common toxins, narcotics, and radiation exposure, but each test came back negative. There was no medical reason for them to be dead. Investigators were left with a disturbing reality. These men had seemingly died without a cause. But if it wasn't trauma and it wasn't poison, then how and why did they die? Hoping to uncover more clues, detectives traced Manuel and Miguel's final days. The last time they were seen alive was on August 17, 1966. Witnesses reported that the 2 men had traveled from their hometown to Niterói, taking a bus in the morning and arriving later that afternoon. They made a few unusual stops along the way. First, they visited a local electronics shop where they purchased materials commonly used for building homemade devices. Some theorized they may have been working on an experiment, one that may have led to their deaths. Next, they visited a local bar where they purchased a bottle of water. The bartender later recalled that Miguel appeared anxious, frequently checking his watch. The men then left the bar and made their way toward Morro do Vintém, the isolated hill where their bodies would later be discovered. And that was it. No one saw them again. No witnesses reported hearing anything unusual. They simply vanished into the hillside, only to be found dead 3 days later. With no cause of death, no witnesses, and only a cryptic note left behind, the investigation stalled. The lead masks were examined, but they revealed no fingerprints, no signs of forced placement, and no traces of chemicals or toxins. They were simply 2 solid pieces of metal, roughly cut and carefully shaped to fit over their faces. Experts struggled to understand why they would wear them. Some speculated that the masks were meant to protect them from radiation, intense light, or some other unseen force. But if they had needed protection, what exactly had they been protecting themselves from? And if they had expected to return home, why had they left behind no explanation, no letters, and no farewells to their families? The more investigators looked, the stranger the case became. The capsules mentioned in the note were never found. The purpose of the lead masks remained unexplained. The identities of anyone they may have been meeting that day were never uncovered. What had Manuel and Miguel been trying to accomplish? Had they been involved in a scientific experiment gone wrong? A ritual? A secret government test? Or was? And their purpose something even more unexplainable, something that couldn't be categorized by traditional investigation. Whatever the answer, it was buried along with them. To this day, The lead mask's case remains one of the most bizarre unsolved deaths in history, but the theories that followed were even stranger. Because for many, the circumstances surrounding the case pointed to something beyond science, beyond logic, and possibly beyond this world. Two men, both radio technicians, found dead under circumstances no one could explain. They carried no weapons, no valuables, and no personal belongings except for a cryptic handwritten note. Their deaths left no visible injuries, no signs of poisoning, and no explanation for why they had climbed the remote Morro do Vintem hill in the first place. But the strangest detail, the one that continues to baffle investigators decades later, were the masks. Thick slabs of lead, cut by hand, worn over their eyes as if shielding them from something invisible. What were these men protecting themselves from? And what exactly had they expected to happen on that hill? The masks found on Manuel and Miguel were unlike anything investigators had ever seen. They weren't helmets, they weren't goggles. They were simple, crude sheets of lead, shaped to cover only their eyes. There were no straps to keep them in place, meaning the men would have had to hold them over their faces manually. The metal was thick, too thick to see through. Immediately, theories emerged. Were the masks designed to shield them from radiation? Lead is known for its ability to block harmful electromagnetic waves and nuclear radiation. Could the men have been conducting an experiment involving powerful radiation or electromagnetic signals? Or had they believed they were going to experience something, a bright light, an energy source, something that required protection? But if that were the case, why did they bring no measuring equipment? No Geiger counters, no radiation detectors, nothing that could have provided proof that they were interacting with something dangerous. And if there was radiation present, why was no trace of it found at the scene? Investigators pored over the handwritten note found beside the bodies, hoping it would provide insight into their final moments. But instead of answers, the note only created more confusion. It read, "Be at the agreed place at 16:30. Take capsules after effect is felt. Protect metals, await signal." The words were written with clear intent, as if the men were following instructions they fully understood. But to everyone else, the message was an enigma. What was the agreed place? What were the capsules, and why were they never found? What metals were they supposed to protect? What signal were they waiting for? Every part of the message hinted at careful planning, yet their deaths seemed completely unplanned, as if something had gone terribly wrong. With no way to decode the message, investigators turned their focus to the men's professions. Manuel and Miguel were electronics technicians, skilled in radio communication. Could their knowledge have played a role in their fate? Had they been attempting to transmit or receive a signal? And if so, who or what were they trying to communicate with? One of the most baffling details of the case was the mention of capsules in the note. Investigators searched for any evidence that the men had taken some kind of drug or chemical substance before their deaths. But toxicology reports found no trace of poison, narcotics, or foreign substances in their systems. If they had taken capsules, they left behind no bottles, no wrappers, no prescription records, nothing. This raised even darker possibilities. Had the capsules contained something undetectable? Had they ingested something experimental, a substance that modern toxicology couldn't identify? Or were the capsules never taken at all? If they had expected something to happen after taking them, some kind of altered state or experience, what had gone wrong? One of the more grounded theories was that Manuel and Miguel had been involved in a private experiment that had gone tragically wrong. Some experts speculated that they had been testing a homemade device, possibly related to electromagnetic energy, radio frequencies, or even radiation exposure. Their expertise in electronics supported this idea. Perhaps they had constructed a device that malfunctioned, causing their sudden deaths. But no device was ever found. There were no wires, no transmitters, no antennas. Nothing at the scene suggested they had brought scientific equipment with them, and yet they had worn lead masks, as if they believed there was a reason to shield themselves from something unseen. Had they expected a powerful burst of radiation, a flash of blinding light, or were they protecting themselves from something entirely different? As investigators looked deeper into the men's personal lives, a new theory began to emerge, one that took the case beyond science and into the realm of the occult. Friends and family revealed that Manuel and Miguel had been deeply involved in spiritualist beliefs. They were fascinated by the idea of contacting higher beings, communicating with spirits, and transcending normal human perception. Had their journey to the hill been a spiritual ritual? Some reports suggest that the men had been trying to make contact with extraterrestrials, believing that the lead masks would protect them from an intense light or energy force during their encounter. Brazil in the 1960s had seen a rise in UFO reports, and some spiritualist groups believed in using technology to make contact with non-human entities. If Manuel and Miguel had been part of such a group, had they tried to summon something on that hill? And had it been their belief in this experiment, rather than any external force, that ultimately led to their deaths? Some researchers believe that the key to understanding the case lies not in science but in the unexplained. Brazil has long been a hotspot for UFO sightings, and in the years leading up to their deaths, reports of mysterious lights in the sky, strange energy bursts, and unexplained disappearances had surfaced across the country. Some believe that Manuel and Miguel had been attempting to communicate with extraterrestrials, using their knowledge of radio frequencies to reach something beyond our world. The lead masks, according to this theory, were meant to shield their eyes from an expected blinding light, a precaution they believed necessary to survive an encounter. But if this were true, then what went wrong? Had they been misled by their own beliefs, expecting a phenomenon that never arrived? Or had they encountered something they could not have anticipated? The case of the lead masks remains one of the most bizarre, unsolved mysteries in modern history. Theories range from scientific accidents to spiritual rituals, from secret experiments to alien contact. But with no conclusive evidence, all that remains are fragments of a story that will never be complete. The men clearly believed they were about to experience something significant. They planned their journey carefully, wrote down instructions, and made preparations. Yet whatever they had intended to happen that day ended only in silence. Decades later, no cause of death has ever been determined. The masks, the note, the missing capsules, all remain unanswered riddles. And whatever truth lay behind this case was buried with them on that hill. Two men, a cryptic note, lead masks shielding their eyes. Decades later, their deaths remain one of the most bizarre, unsolved cases in history. The circumstances defy logic. No cause of death, no signs of struggle, and no clear motive. Investigators followed every lead, but every theory raised more questions than answers. Were they conducting a secret experiment, participating in an occult ritual, victims of foul play, or had they encountered something far beyond human understanding? Theories range from scientific anomalies to extraterrestrial intervention, but none provide a definitive answer. What really happened to Manuel Pereira da Cruz and Miguel José Viana on that hill? One of the most grounded theories is that the men were attempting a dangerous experiment involving radiation or electromagnetic energy. As radio technicians, Manuel and Miguel had expertise in electronics. Some believe they were trying to test a device capable of transmitting or receiving powerful signals, possibly something beyond the scope of traditional radio frequencies. The presence of lead masks supports this idea. Lead is known to block radiation and intense electromagnetic waves. Were they shielding their eyes from a dangerous energy burst? But if that were the case, why was no scientific equipment found at the scene? No wires, no transmitters, no batteries or circuits. Nothing that would indicate an experiment had taken place. And even if they had been exposed to some form of energy, forensic reports found no radiation poisoning in their bodies. If it was an experiment, where was the proof? Nay, the men's interest in spiritualism opened another possibility, that their deaths were connected to a secret ritual. Brazil in the 1960s saw a rise in spiritualist movements, many of which believed in contacting higher planes of existence. Some even claimed to have developed technological methods to enhance these experiences. Could the men have been part of a hidden group attempting to reach the spiritual realm? The cryptic note suggests they were following precise instructions, as if preparing for an out-of-body experience, a trance, or an altered state of consciousness. But if this was a ritual, then why did it end in death? Did they take a drug intended to induce visions, one that accidentally proved fatal? If so, why was no trace of any drug found in their system? And if this was a controlled ritual, why were they alone? Most spiritualist ceremonies involved multiple participants. If they were expecting something divine, did it arrive in a form they could not survive? One of the most controversial theories is that Manuel and Miguel were trying to communicate with extraterrestrials. The 1960s saw a surge in UFO sightings across Brazil, particularly in the years leading up to their deaths. Many reports spoke of blinding lights, unexplained radiation burns, and electromagnetic disturbances, phenomena eerily similar to what the men may have been preparing for. Could they have been trying to attract a UFO signal? The note's mention of awaiting a signal has fueled speculation that the men were expecting contact with an unknown entity. The lead masks would support this theory, if they believed that a bright flash of light or radiation would accompany the encounter. But if they were attempting contact, why did no one see any strange lights or flying objects that night? Had they simply fallen victim to their own beliefs? Or had something happened on that hill that no one was ever meant to witness? For all the supernatural speculation, some believe the case was far more human, a murder, carefully disguised to appear as something unexplainable. The missing capsules are one of the biggest red flags. If the men were supposed to take pills before awaiting the signal, where did those capsules go? Had someone given them poison and removed all traces afterward? Some theories suggest the men may have been involved with the wrong people, possibly in an underground group or a secretive spiritualist faction. If their experiment or ritual was part of a larger organization, could someone have decided they were a liability? A murder disguised as an unsolvable mystery would ensure no one asked too many questions. But if it was a murder, why were there no signs of struggle? And how did the killers manage to leave no physical evidence behind? Each theory provides a possible explanation, yet each one fails to account for all the details. If they died of natural causes, why was no medical explanation ever found? If they were poisoned, why was there no trace of toxins? If it was an experiment, why was no equipment found? If it was a ritual, why were they alone? If they were awaiting something, what was it? Every element of the case suggests careful planning, yet the outcome suggests complete disaster. Whatever the men expected to happen that night, it didn't go as planned. Did they die from an experiment gone wrong? A ritual that spiraled out of control, or an encounter that cost them their lives? Or were they simply two men chasing an impossible dream, only to be consumed by it? The truth remains buried with them, and in the decades since their deaths, no one has come closer to solving the mystery. The lead masks case remains one of the strangest unsolved mysteries of the 20th century. Investigators exhausted every possible lead, but in the end, the case was left open, without a cause, without an explanation, without justice. Manuel and Miguel had written their own instructions, walked willingly to their deaths, and left behind only questions. Whatever happened on that hill, whether it was scientific, spiritual, or something unexplainable, took their lives and left the world with a mystery that refuses to be forgotten. And so, their story remains frozen in time. Two men, a cryptic note, and two lead masks that shielded their eyes from something unseen, something that may have been waiting for them, or something that was never there at all. Decades have passed since the discovery of two men lying dead on Morro do Vintém, their faces covered by strange lead masks. Investigators searched for answers, forensic experts examined every possibility, and theorists speculated on what could have led to their mysterious deaths. Yet after all this time, the most haunting part of the lead masks case isn't just what we know, it's what we still don't. Because despite all the theories, all the speculation, and all the investigations, no one has ever solved the mystery. Perhaps the most baffling part of the case is the fact that despite extensive forensic analysis, no official cause of death was ever determined. Both men were in good health before their final journey. Their bodies showed no signs of external injuries, no gunshot wounds, no stab wounds, no strangulation marks. Toxicology tests found no evidence of poisoning, no drugs, no lethal chemicals. If they had taken the capsules mentioned in their note, where were the remains? Why were there no traces in their stomachs or bloodstreams? If they had died from a chemical reaction, a radiation burst, or some kind of electromagnetic interference, why did their bodies show no signs of exposure? Forensic experts were left with nothing. It was as if they had simply ceased to exist. The lead masks remain one of the most inexplicable aspects of the case. Were they trying to block radiation, electromagnetic waves, or a bright flash of light? If so, why were the masks so crudely made, lacking straps or a way to secure them in place? And if they expected to return home after their experiment, why were there no additional masks in their bags? Had they misinterpreted scientific principles? Or were they simply following ritualistic instructions they didn't fully understand? The cryptic note found at the scene suggests that Manuel and Miguel were waiting for something, a signal. But a signal from whom or from what? If they were expecting a transmission, why was there no radio equipment at the scene? If they were awaiting a spiritual event, why were there no witnesses, no other members of their group present? Had they been waiting for a real person to meet them on that hill? And if so, did that person betray them? The note instructed them to take capsules after the effect was felt, but no capsules were ever recovered. Had they taken something so unusual that it left no traces in their bodies? Had they been given a substance they didn't recognize, one that caused their deaths in an undetectable way? Or did the capsules never exist in the first place? If someone else had been involved, had they removed all evidence before leaving the scene? One of the most chilling questions is whether or not Manuel and Miguel died alone. No one reported seeing them on the hill after they left town, but the case file suggests that footprints were found near the scene that did not belong to the two men. Did someone accompany them? If so, who were they, and why did they never come forward? If they were part of a larger group, had they been left behind as an offering, a sacrifice, or an experiment gone wrong? Or had they met with someone who silenced them before disappearing forever? Despite the case's bizarre nature, Brazilian authorities eventually closed the investigation without a conclusive answer. Police followed every available lead, but with no cause of death, no suspects, and no witnesses. The case was left open-ended. Some theorists believe that authorities may have known more than they revealed. Had they discovered information that pointed to a secret experiment, a classified program, or an underground group, something they were not allowed to disclose? Or had they simply given up when all logical explanations failed? Time has erased many of the details of the lead masks case. Evidence has been lost. Witnesses have passed away. New forensic technology could have provided answers, but the bodies have long since decomposed, leaving no chance for further examination. Without new evidence, the mystery remains frozen in time. Two men lying side by side, their faces covered. With lead, their final moments lost to history. Will we ever know the truth, or was the lead masks case always meant to remain unsolved? Decades later, the question lingers. Were these men victims of their own scientific ambitions? A failed spiritual experiment? A murder carefully disguised as a mystery? Or did they encounter something on that hill, something no one was ever meant to understand? Their lead masks hid their eyes from the world. But whatever they were trying to protect themselves from, we may never know if it was real. Some mysteries fade with time. The details blur, the witnesses disappear, and the truth, if it ever existed, slips into oblivion. But some mysteries refuse to be forgotten. The lead masks case is one of them. Two men found dead under impossible circumstances. A cryptic note promising a signal that never came. Lead masks hiding their eyes from something unseen. And a case that decades later remains as unsolved as the day their bodies were found. Science could not explain what killed them. Investigators could not determine how they died, and history has failed to provide a single, satisfying answer. Were they scientists pushing the boundaries of human knowledge? Were they spiritualists hoping to reach something beyond our understanding? Or were they the victims of something much darker, something that the world was never meant to uncover? Theories have emerged, each one more bizarre than the last. Some believe they were attempting to contact extraterrestrials. Others say they were part of a secretive cult, following rituals that led them to their deaths. Some think they were murdered, by whom no one knows. And then there are those who believe they died because they tried to tap into something they were never meant to. But every theory has one fatal flaw. None of them fit all the facts. No poison, no injuries, no evidence. Just two men lying side by side, their eyes hidden behind heavy slabs of metal, as if shielding them from something only they could see. Perhaps the true reason why the lead masks case continues to haunt us is because it feels unfinished. There is no resolution, no confirmed cause of death, no final answer to why these men went up that hill or what they were hoping to find. It is a story without an ending, and stories like that, stories that leave us with more questions than answers, have a way of getting under our skin. The human mind searches for closure. It seeks explanations. It demands a reason. But sometimes there is none. It has been over half a century since Manuel Pereira da Cruz and Miguel José Viana made their way to Morro do Vintém for reasons only they understood. Whatever they expected to happen that night, it never came. Or maybe it did. And whatever happened to them, whatever they saw, whatever they experienced, it took their lives and left behind a puzzle that no one has been able to solve. Somewhere out there, perhaps, there is still an answer. A missing piece of evidence, a witness who never spoke, a note left behind in some forgotten archive, waiting to be discovered. But until that day comes, this case remains what it has always been. A riddle without a solution, a death without an explanation, a mystery that refuses to die. And so, the lead masks case remains one of the strangest unsolved mysteries in modern history. Two men, one note, and two lead masks shielding their eyes from the unknown, a secret they took to the grave.